Father, we're so glad to be here this morning, to be together, to be thinking and studying and reflecting on the most important things that we can reflect on. You and your world and how we can be more effective in fulfilling your great commission and being ambassadors for you. We want that, Father. This world needs it. And we thank you for this opportunity to get together with people who are capable of training us to do that better. Help us, Lord. Brighten our eyes. Keep us alert through the day. Help our minds to be attentive. Work through each speaker, Father, to bear fruit that remains for the kingdom, for Christ's sake, and in His name. Amen. Now, our first speaker today is the founder and president of Stand to Reason. He's the author of Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions, relativism, feet firmly planted in midair. He's been on talk radio for 23 years, taking the toughest calls and challenges from people live on radio. He's spoken in more than 65 college and university campuses, spent in Montgomery First Baptist a number of times, and actually really loves it here. Please welcome our first speaker, me. I've actually never had to introduce myself before, so that was a little bit odd. But now that we've got past that. Recently on a flight from Los Angeles up to Northern California, I sat next to an interesting world traveler named Stuart Spear. Now, he's nobody famous, but he's just a guy that been around the world and had a high opinion of himself and his ideas. And he'd had a few drinks, and so he was talkative, and we ended up having a conversation for a half hour about spiritual matters. And he had very strong opinions about religion. In his travels around the world and his survey of world religions, he'd concluded that the common element of all religions, and therefore the core truth, was love and people just getting along with one another. And further, he was rather uncomfortable with people who, who thought that the only way to God was their own way. That they had the narrow view, that they got it right. And this to him was inconsistent with love and getting along with people. And if you think you got it right, well, then there's something wrong with you. Now, of course, it never occurred to him that his own view was guilty of that problem, because he was just telling me what he thought the key to all religious truth was, and he thought he got it right, and anybody who disagreed with him was wrong, but this hadn't occurred to him. The word hate actually came up in the conversation, which it often does at this point. That is, people who are narrow-minded like that are people who are fomenting hate. So we talked the whole flight, and Stuart Spear was a pluralist, and he's not alone. There are a lot of people that are like him, that believe that the main thing about religion is just getting along, doing the best that you can, loving one another, and that's what God cares about. And if you're into the business of trying to demonstrate that your own view is the only true view, well, then you're part of the problem. Of course, in our conversation, I was in that select few who thought, after doing some thinking about his own convictions, that I'd gotten it right. And I wasn't ashamed to talk to him about that. Indeed, he said that at one point. He said, "You must be one of those people that thinks that 90% of the people in the world are wrong." I said, "Well, I am, but that's not intolerance. That's just simple math." And I'll explain that comment to you in just a moment. In fact, what I'd like to do is I'd like to equip you this morning, if you're a follower of Christ, to maybe manage this kind of issue a little bit more carefully and intelligibly. And if you're not a follower of Christ, which I'm sure there are some of you that are viewing either through live streaming or here in the audience, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm not here to convert you today. I just want to put a stone in your shoe. I want to get you thinking, because I'm convinced that the way that Jesus of Nazareth saw the world is worth thinking about. And I don't think that this issue of the intolerant, narrow-minded view of Christians is quite as cut and dried as some have thought. So I want to address that just a little bit. Actually, at the end of my conversation with Mr. Spear, he kind of settled back in his seat and he said, well, do you think that I've done a good job in thinking through this issue? Now, I wouldn't have volunteered this information, but he asked, right? And I said, well, actually, I don't think you have thought this through very carefully. And this morning, I want to tell you some of the things that were wrong with the way he's approaching this issue. You see, to Stuart Spear, Christianity was a problem. And Christianity is a problem to a lot of people for two reasons. One I've already hinted at, the problem of intolerance. And the other one is the broader question is, how could anybody actually know the truth about spiritual things? I mean, we can know things about the world and science and history and things like that, but that's one category of information we can be confident about. But when it comes to this other category of information, the spiritual realm, who can know? How can we be confident enough to say that our convictions about those kinds of things, religious claims or moral claims, can actually be so true, we can be so confident of them being true that we can annoy other people with their claims? So I want to address those particular issues, and I want to broadly argue that any old God won't do. I'm going to argue against the notion or the charge that such a view is intolerant. I'm going to, and I'm actually convinced that pluralism is just plain false, and I'll give you my reasons why I think that's the case. I also want to introduce three principles that we use all the time to help us determine what's true about the world and what's false about the world in all different areas. And I don't know why we can't use those same tools to adjudicate on spiritual issues. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then finally, I want to show you why those three tools give us confidence that Jesus got it right, and therefore the smart money is on him. And this may not be a slam dunk for some of you, but what I want to do, as I said a moment ago, is to give you something worth thinking about. My whole approach to doing this is to build a cumulative case, is to show all of the reasons and all of the kinds of evidences that give one confidence that Jesus was who he claimed to be, and the world is like the way he claimed it was, and he could do for us individually what he said he could do: rescue us for all eternity. Before I get into those three things, though, I have to deal more directly with a common objection that gets in the way. In fact, it is meant to stonewall followers of Christ, stop them in their tracks before they even get started. It's really, I think, meant in a certain politically correct way to humiliate a Christian and keep them from expressing their message. But it turns out to be an approach that strikes me as so silly that it's amazing so many people are impressed with it. I want you to think for a moment about going to the doctor with your friend. Your friend's a little concerned about an ache or a pain he has, and maybe it's nothing, but he wants a buddy to go along with him. You go with him to the doctor. The doctor examines him, and the doctor says, you have cancer, and you need an operation right away, or you're going to die. Now, what would you think of your friend if your friend said to the doctor, you're mean. I'm going to go to some other doctor that's not so mean. Now, you would probably think that was an unusual response, because it might occur to you that whether or not the doctor's analysis was correct was unrelated to whether he was mean or not, right? I mean, he could be a mean doctor, but he also could be a good doctor in the sense that his analysis was correct. He could be a really nice doctor and have a lousy analysis. That is, the goodness, or rather the niceness or meanness of the doctor is unrelated to whether or not he can tell you the truth about your condition, right? So you might think that your friend had kind of missed the point of the meeting. But the second thing you might think is that your friend is foolish for rejecting the doctor's analysis simply because he did not like what the doctor said. Or even worse, that somehow this could be construed as a character flaw of the doctor. Okay, if you've got that illustration in your mind, I want you now to carry that over into a more common and probably a more familiar circumstance. You are talking with someone about spiritual things. You're a follower of Christ. You tell the individual in so many words that they are dying of a deadly spiritual disease, but no worry, there is an antidote. Jesus of Nazareth. And the response of the person you're talking with is, "You're mean." Now, of course, that's not exactly how they put it, is it? They use a different phrase. Because if they just said, "You're mean," that would immediately raise red flags. Like, what does that have to do with anything? But instead, they say this: "You're," what? "Intolerant." Now, I just want you to think about the response. Notice that the response does not address the claim. The claim is about Jesus, and that's either true or false. And it could be false for the sake of discussion. But the response doesn't address that. It rather addresses the person who's speaking the message, and it makes a character assessment on the person. Now, is it possible the Christian is mean? Sure, it's possible that Christians are mean. There are lots of mean Christians, I imagine. I don't meet too many of them, but they're human beings, right? But is it also possible they can be mean and be correct on this issue? So the meanness or non-meanness doesn't have anything to do, once again, just like with the doctor, with whether the assessment is correct. Further, if a person feels satisfied in dismissing the Christian by calling them mean and intolerant, it may turn out that they really are dying of a deadly spiritual disease, and they may miss the antidote by this dismissal. Now, I raise that here in the beginning because it is the first thing that comes to people's minds when the issue of Jesus being the only way is even hinted at. And many people feel completely justified in not even considering the issue any further because the Christian who says it is just a nasty fellow. But I want to encourage you to think past that and realize that this charge has no bearing on whether the Christian's claim is true. What if I said to the non-Christian who said to me, "Well, you're intolerant," I said back to him, "Well, you're ugly. And your mother dresses you funny." Would this be an appropriate response? No, of course not. I wouldn't say that. Because it has nothing to do with the issue. But how is that any different than what he said to me? He attacks my character. I attack his looks. Neither of us are talking at that point about the issue, whether or not we should take Jesus seriously. And so I point this out in the beginning because I want you to realize that that's kind of a nonsense response. This is for third graders. Why don't we leave it to the third graders or correct them so they don't bring it into the fourth grader? And for us as adults, get on with doing a reasonable, intelligent discussion on spiritual matters. And that brings us to the second issue. The broad question of whether all religions can, in fact, be equally true. Now, I was actually flown out to Toronto to do a TV show a number of years ago on this question. The question was pluralism. I, alone among the people on the panel, rejected the notion of pluralism. Actually, they flew me out on purpose to put me in the hot seat behind one side of the table while three other people came up during the course of the show for 1 hour on national secular TV in Canada to beat up the religious weirdo on this religious issue. And I gave my reasons why I rejected pluralism. And I could have argued in the discussion, I could have argued, well, I'm a Christian, and I think Christianity is true, and if Christianity is true, then the other religions are false by process of elimination. I could have argued that way, and I think that's a noble way of arguing as long as you put more meat to it. But if I had done that, then Christianity itself would have been the subject of conversation. And frankly, I didn't want that to be the case. I wanted pluralism to be front and center. That's what the show was about. So I decided to make my case against pluralism using an argument that did not trade on my own religious convictions. That is, I didn't want to give an argument only a Christian can use. Frankly, I said to the audience and to the host, this argument is an argument anybody can use, even if they're an atheist. An atheist is open to the idea that maybe some religion might be true. He still could use this argument to reject the notion that they are all equally true and valid. And here's the argument I gave. I said Jesus claimed to be the Messiah. If he's not the Messiah, then the Christians are wrong. If he's not the Messiah, then the Christians are wrong. Yeah, and the Jews are right. If he is the Messiah, the Christians are right and the Jews are wrong, but under no circumstances can they both be right. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. If God exists, I said, he's either personal or not personal. Now, if he's not personal, if he's some kind of force, well, then the Hindus are right on that one, and the Jews and the Christians and Muslims are wrong. If it turns out that he is a personal being, well, then the Jews and Christians and Muslims are right on that point, and the Hindus are wrong, but under no circumstance can they both be right. When you die, you either go to heaven or hell, or maybe you get reincarnated, or maybe you go to astral worlds, or maybe you lie in the grave and do nothing but decay, but you can't do them all at the same time. Somebody's mistaken. They can't all be right. And by the way, notice I'm not talking about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin here. I'm talking about the foundational questions of religion, the ultimate nature of reality, the nature of being human, whether or not there's a heaven or hell or an afterlife or what that's like. These are issues upon which there's a wild divergence of opinion. And at this point, please understand, at this point in this conversation and also in the TV show, I was not arguing that my own view was correct because Christianity wasn't on trial then. Pluralism was on trial. I was just trying to help people to see that a carefully thinking person has got to admit they can't all be true. Now, we went to break, commercial, came back, and then in a sense, the opponents began to stack up against me. And the first person up was a Sikh who is a man from a religious order from India. The gentleman wear the turbans. He was a barrister there in Toronto. Very smart guy, really nice to be in the green room, but now we were across the table from each other. That was a different story. When he was asked what he thought of my point of view that I just offered, remember, I just offered an argument. I didn't offer a defense for Christianity. I wasn't trying to force my view on anybody. I was reasoning with my audience, such as it was. First thing he said was, well, if Mr. Koukl thinks he won the lottery, good for him. Mr. Koukl thinks the lottery? What is he talking about? Was he talking about my argument against pluralism? No, he was talking about the fact that he knew that I was a follower of Jesus Christ and believed that Jesus was who Jesus himself claimed to be, the only way of salvation. And therefore, I won the lottery. Lucky me. And then, of course, that was a passive-aggressive beginning, and he didn't stay passive for long. And pretty soon he's angry at me, and he's up and out of his chair, and he's shaking paper in my face, and Valerie Pringle, the host, had to push him down in his chair more than once because he was so animated and upset at me. Now, you got to know something I didn't tell you yet, and that is before the cameras began rolling, I was talking with somebody on the set, because this is a secular enterprise. We were in a sound studio. There was a small audience there on the stage, and one of the guys, Pierre, who is with the show, he was an atheist. We had met before. We were making small talk, and I said, Pierre, I'm going to make a little gentleman's wager with you. I said, I'm not sure if this is going to happen, but I suspect what's going to happen is I'm going to give an argument for my point of view, and those people on the panel are going to ignore the argument, and they're going to start calling me names. Narrow-minded, arrogant. Making the same mistake that I was talking about in the illustration your friend made when he went to the doctor, found out he had cancer, and called his doctor mean. I said, I don't know if it'll happen, but we'll just wait and see. And sure enough, it wasn't long before, out of the mouth of the Sikh and then the other members of the panel, certain words crept into their conversation. Words like intolerant, narrow-minded, arrogant. In other words, they were attacking me, not the argument. This happens all the time. And I pointed it out. I said, you know what, it's interesting how the conversation has gone. We started talking about an issue of pluralism, and now the conversation shifted over to the question of Mr. Koukl's personality. Mr. Koukl is arrogant. Mr. Koukl is narrow-minded. Mr. Koukl is intolerant. Mr. Koukl's mean, I guess is what you're saying. I said, all right, why don't I just cop to that? Why don't I just agree with you guys that I'm mean? And once I agree that I'm mean, then we can get off of that topic and talk about what we're supposed to be talking about here today, which isn't me, but the idea of pluralism. I said, you know, it's also interesting that you're attacking me in virtue of your understanding of my own religious convictions. You think I'm wrong. I represent classical Christianity. Well, if I'm wrong in my convictions of classical Christianity, well, then that means classical Christianity is wrong. And if classical Christianity is wrong, as you're implying, well, then it's not true that all religions are equally right. So in other words, if you're right about your attack on me right now, then you're wrong about the thing we're supposed to be talking about today. They didn't get it. One whole hour, they didn't get it. The atheist got it. In fact, he bounded up on the stage after the show was over, and he was really mad at the Sikh, and he was using language appropriate for an atheist. So, pluralism, this is a dead end. It's a non-starter. It doesn't mean that my views are right. It just simply means that they can't all be right. Maybe I'm the wrong one. So to say that 80 to 90% of the people of the world are wrong, well, that's not arrogance. That's not narrow-mindedness. That's not intolerance. That's just plain math. Now, with that out of the way, we have another concern, and the other concern has to do with, well, then, how do you know anyhow? Sometimes people think that Christians are arrogant for making this claim, which, by the way, is a claim that Jesus himself made. So when I say that Jesus is the only way, I'm merely saying what Jesus himself said, and then taught his followers to say after him, because every single one of his followers that wrote anything down all wrote the same thing. You don't like the idea that Jesus is the only way, don't get mad at me. Get mad at Jesus. He's the one who started this thing. And in fact, if you're not clear on that, we put together at Stand to Reason a little red booklet. We have a whole bunch of them out there on the Stand to Reason table. It's called Jesus the Only Way, 100 verses. Now, it says my name at the bottom like I wrote it, but God wrote most of this. 100 verses that either explicitly or implicitly teach that Jesus is the only way of salvation. For the financially challenged, too. It's $2. But it's good to have so you can show people that this is not us making it up. This is what Jesus said. Take it up with him. But sometimes people think this is an arrogant claim because how could you know? How could anybody know that? And so what I want to do very quickly here is talk about 3 different ways that we know things. 3 different tools or techniques we use all the time without even thinking about it to tell us about the world. And the first one is that we discover things. I'm going to give you 3 of them really quickly, and then I'll go back over them in a little more detail. First, we discover things by reflection. Somebody makes a suggestion about what they think is true, and we do this. We think about it. And what we're thinking about at that point, we're asking whether the idea itself makes sense. whether it's internally coherent, whether there's something contradictory about it. You know, some people complain about the issue of Christianity, and they say, well, there can't be a God because there is evil in the world. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole objection, but you know the objection. Notice how the objection trades on a kind of a this doesn't make sense kind of thing. Wait a minute, you say your God is good, you say your God is powerful. If those things were true, there wouldn't be evil in the world, but there is evil in the world, therefore, your God is either not good or not powerful, or it probably doesn't exist at all. So you know the argument. Notice how that argument trades on a reflection. It's the ability to think about the notion and to see whether it works or not. We're looking for internal contradiction, if you will, in that. The second test that we often use is observation. And that is, we observe the world and we learn the truth about the world through observation. This might be the scientific method, if you will, but we use it in less formal ways. Your boss says to you, why were you late for work? You say, I got held up by a herd of elephants in Atlanta. Well, your boss isn't going to take it seriously because there are no elephant herds around here, probably. Third, we learn things by authority. And authority is when we learn things based on not what we have thought through and not what we have personally assessed, but rather what somebody else who we trust tells us, especially if that other person is in a better position to tell us what's true about the matter. So let's take each one in a little bit more detail. First, we know what's true by reflection. And there are two notions here, the notion of contradiction and also that we're looking for an absence of contradiction. We dismiss things that seem to be contradictory or they just simply don't make sense in a rational way. And we also are compelled by ideas that seem to hold together in a nice, coherent fashion. For an example of this kind of thing, think of the headline in the newspaper in the grocery rack, woman discovered who is 10 years younger than her son. Now, how many here would purchase that? I'm going to read it. No, you don't even waste your time. Because no empirical search is necessary to reject the claim. Even if the most brilliant person alive said this, you could immediately reject it. Because, you know, by nature, mothers can't be younger than their children. And sometimes explicit contradictions are fairly obvious and sometimes funny. I used to believe in reincarnation, but that was in a former life. Ask me about my vow of silence. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. Always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't go to yours. Those last two are Yogi Berra's. How about this one? If you want to know whether you're home or not, just go outside and look in the window. Or a woman once wrote to her son in college, your sister had a baby this morning. I haven't heard if it's a boy or a girl, so I don't know whether you're an aunt or an uncle. Then she signs off. If you don't get this letter, let me know and I'll send you another one. Now, these are funny things, but these kinds of things happen all the time with regards to important things by people who should know better. How about this sign on the campus lawn? It's not wrong to think you're right, but it's not right to think others are wrong. Now, that sounds clever until you think about it for a moment. Then you realize that it's contradictory. Because in the second phrase, it's not right to think others are wrong. Isn't that just another way of saying that others are wrong for thinking that others are wrong? See the contradiction built in there? Some of you like deer in the headlights. Wait a minute. That's philosophy. I know that's philosophy. You're slipping it in there somewhere. Yeah, but it's also common sense. And the things that are most obvious we see right away. But sometimes the other things are more subtle, and this is part of what I'm pointing out. If we want to make our tool work well for us, we think through how the tool works, and then we see how it applies to other things. For example, a person who says, hey, there is no morality. Morals are relative. It's just a matter of individual opinion. Therefore, you shouldn't push your morality on me. Now, probably most of you have heard this many times, but you never realized it entailed a contradiction. There is no morality, therefore it's wrong for you to push your morality on me. Well, now they've made a moral statement, haven't they? They're saying there are no moral rules. Here's one. It's a contradiction. So this is one way that we can assess things. One reason, for example, that I don't believe in Hinduism is because it entails what I think is a contradiction. In Hinduism, God is impersonal, and He's the only thing that exists. Or it is the only thing that exists. It's an impersonal force, and that everything that looks like a distinction in the universe is just part of an illusion. So we're all part of an illusion. This is what I'm asked to believe in Vedantic Hinduism. I can know that I am an illusion. Does that strike any of you as a little bit odd? Let me put it this way. Last night, if you had a dream and you had characters in your dream, did your dream characters know they were dream characters? You said, no, my dream characters didn't know anything. They were just dreams. Does Charlie Brown know he's a cartoon character? No. Well, the same thing applies here, it seems to me. How can I know that I'm in God's dream? And so therefore, I've never taken Hinduism seriously for that reason. And there are lots of things like that. I don't have the time to go into detail on all of them, but some things become clearly false. Now, when I look at Christianity, I don't find any of those kinds of things. I don't find those contradictions. No, I know the problem of evil seems to be a contradiction to some people. But very few philosophers trade on that problem anymore because it's largely been solved by the free will defense. There is no contradiction in that. And in fact, if we had contradictory notions that were genuinely contradictory, then we'd be in trouble. The second tool that we use is reflection. I'm sorry, the first is reflection. The second one is, you might call it observation and discovery. And what we want to ask ourselves is, does the view fit with the world as we discover it to be? And here, this to me is one of the most powerful defenses of Christianity. And again, I could just brush over the top of it for time's sake. But one of the things that compels me as a human being, not as a philosopher, not as an apologist, not as a theologian, but as a human being, is that when I think of the way that Jesus saw the world, the way He describes the way the world is seems to be the way I experience the world. For example, I experience a world that is orderly. Science works because of the uniformity of cause and effect, certain scientific laws and stuff we've been able to... Why is the world like that? Why is the world orderly? Well, if there is a God, that would explain it. Now, maybe that doesn't prove that there's a God, but what I'm trying to show you is that there's a tie, there's a touchstone between the claims of Jesus who believed in God and the way the world is. Science works because of an orderliness that seems hard to explain apart from somebody who put the universe in order. You ever ask somebody if they would talk somebody out? Let me put it this way. People sometimes say there's no meaning to life. I said, no, you know better than that. Really? I said, yeah, would you ever talk somebody out of a suicide? Yeah. Why? Well, I wouldn't want them to waste their life. Okay, fair enough. How can you waste something that has no meaning? Doesn't the fact that you want to talk them out of suicide indicate that you already know that life has some kind of transcendent meaning that goes beyond their own plans, which are to kill themselves at that moment? Doesn't everybody have an awareness that something's wrong with the world? Doesn't everybody experience a bad self-image and a sense of guilt inside? When I lectured at Berkeley, I talked about this. I know everybody in this audience feels guilt. You can't get away from it. Why do you feel guilty? I asked them. Well, maybe culture causes it. That's something to talk about. How about this? Maybe we feel guilty because we are guilty. Is that in the running? Is that a possibility? Because if we feel guilty because we are guilty, then denial is not the solution. Rather, forgiveness is the solution. And so at each point here, as we're looking at the details and the particulars of the Christian explanation of reality, we end up with a kind of a touchstone there. We think, yeah, well, that makes sense. That seems to fit. Now, a lot of the questions that we deal with as apologists are the times when Christian claims don't seem to fit. I get calls on the radio show all the time about that. And my job is to help them to see, no, it actually fits better than you think it does. And I help them to see it. And see, this becomes another powerful evidence. Now, I'm not an atheist because it violates this principle. I'm not an atheist because there are too many things that are counterintuitive that I'd have to affirm. When I had my 3-hour debate with Michael Shermer on national radio 2 years ago on this issue of atheism and Christianity, theism, I ended by saying this very thing. I said, I can't be an atheist. I cannot bring myself to believe in atheism because it would require me to commit myself to things that are just wildly counterintuitive. That everything came from nothing, that life came from non-life, that consciousness came from matter, that morality just poofed into the air out of nowhere? Come on. I mean, you're welcome to believe that, but you think that's where the smart money is? No, I think that's things came from something or someone in this particular case. That life came from the life giver, that morality comes from the ground of morality and the ground of goodness, that consciousness comes from a conscious soul himself. So these things all fit in our worldview, but they make no sense in the atheistic worldview. So we learn things by reflection. We learn things by examining our environment and seeing the fit between our worldview and the way the world actually turns out to be. The third thing is that we learn by authority. And this is where people balk a bit because they think, oh yeah, well now you're going to start quoting the Bible at me. And I just want to point out that knowing things by authority is not an odd way to know something. It isn't just the thing that Christians do. I mean, most of you think that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade and 212 Fahrenheit down to sea level. Or that the earth goes around the sun, or that atoms have a nucleus. But none of you, I presume, ever did the work to discover it. You're not astronauts, you didn't boil the water, you could have done that, but who does that, Who cares? But you believe all these things to be true, and I think they are true, but you believe them to be true because someone told you. When you think about it, almost everything that you know because somebody told you. Not because you did the work yourself. Most of what you think you know, and probably do know, you know because of some authority. Somebody who is in a better position to give you accurate information. And even when you have multiple religions, that may sound good or may work as far as it goes when it comes to the first two tests. You break the tie by looking at the authority. And this is where Jesus of Nazareth comes in. Jesus is central to Christianity. Jesus is a person that's fastened to history. We can assess the claims of Jesus and the views of Jesus because we have very good historical reasons to believe that he said all of the things he said and that he did the things that are claimed of him in the primary source historical documents called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, if this is true, if Jesus made these radical claims, like I am the way, the truth, and the life, no man comes to the Father but through me. I am the bread of life. I am the living water. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. Who makes statements like this and gets away with it? Well, Jesus got away with it because he had tremendous credibility. In fact, when you look at the details of the life of Jesus and you try to assess them using our first tool, you assess according to rational categories, you have one of three choices. Either Jesus was right or wrong. Those are two choices. But if Jesus was wrong, he was wrong for one of two reasons. He either knew he was wrong, or he didn't know he was wrong. If Jesus made these dramatic claims, and he was wrong, and he knew he was wrong, then he was a liar of the worst sort. Now, I don't know about you, but if I think of the life of Jesus, a man that is universally respected across the globe, regardless of any other religious commitments people might make on him, and to say that this guy was a liar when it comes to virtually every single thing he taught, this is too much for me to take. This doesn't make sense. So I don't think that the odds are he was a liar. But if he was mistaken and he wasn't lying because he knew he was mistaken, then he thought he was all these things: the bread of life, the resurrection of life, the living water, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, God himself, and really believed it. Now, what do you make of somebody who thinks they're God, but isn't? This person is certifiable. Now, does this seem to fit with the facts that we have about Jesus' life? We don't think he's crazy, a liar, but was he crazy? Well, one person put it this way, kind of in summary: if Jesus was nuts, where does that leave us? Here's a guy who moved towards reality rather than away from reality. As I said, a person that people universally look up to as a leader and a great man and a great moral teacher and a great prophet. It does not make sense that he was a liar or he was a lunatic. Well, if he wasn't lying and he wasn't a lunatic, that is, if he wasn't wrong and he knew he was wrong, lying, or wrong and he didn't know he was lying, lunatic, then there's only one alternative left. He wasn't wrong. He was right. He got it right. In fact, he got everything right, if he was who he claimed to be. And so as a follower of Christ, I come to this enterprise, and though I am called intolerant for my view, I try to sidestep the attack on my character and to point out that this doesn't really relate to the question. Whether or not I'm nice is irrelevant to whether or not I'm correct. But let me tell you why I think I'm correct. Because I got three tools on my side. I got the notion of coherence and sensibility. I have the notion of assessment in the physical world. And I have the authority of Jesus himself on my side. And if that adds up the way I think it does, then that changes everything. That what I'm doing by putting my trust in Christ is not a wild leap in the dark, but a careful assessment and step of trust to count on for rescue the only one who is capable of rescuing me or you. Father, thank you for this, so short time that we had together. I do pray, Father, that you would use the words that were spoken to bear fruit in people's lives as they think about how to think about religious things, and especially about the gospel of your Son, Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen. All right, friends, 15 minutes, 10 o'clock, we'll be back here with our next speaker.